Randy, we've got a problem.
What?
They go.
Reality's here. He's trying to crash the party. Reality? Who let him in?
You're sad that people are mean? Well, I'm sorry. The world isn't one big liberal arts college campus.
I don't have an agenda. Like, I want people to do something. I need them to do something. I want them to avoid irrationality.
I guess what interests me is just like what interests everybody else. It's just sort of what feels real.
That was totally wicked!
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another edition of Real News in the Morning. It is currently 9:03 on this August 10th. How is everybody doing? How was everybody's weekend? My name is Mr. Henry. David Shine Thompson over there. Jam-packed show today. The intro music is there bumping in the background. Hopefully everybody's doing well, man. Hopefully everybody had a great, fantastic weekend. I know David and I, man, we got our work on, man. We were accomplishing goals. You know what I mean? Trying to make the world a slightly better place, at least in our minds. Who knows if we accomplished the goal or not? But that's how we did. Hey, realnewsradio.live, realnewsradio.live. That is the central landing page, the hub, if you will, of all the real news related stuff. We can, have a little bit of merch there. You have some mugs, some little stickers, some other stuff like that, a little backpack, t-shirt. Find that stuff there, realnewsradio.live. That's us where you can find links to the Twitch, YouTube, Facebook, Minds. I just posted on Minds. We got a Parler link there. I mean, anything that we're doing over here, real news related, you find the links there. As I said before, my name is Mr. Henry. Got the unified chat going on over here. Kelly's already in the Facebook here, already typing. I love it. I absolutely love it. Pedos for Gitmo. Hashtag save our children. Hashtag vaccines are still poison. So let's see. Jonathan said, so have I. Kelly said, good morning, fellow humans. The Twilight Zone 2020. That's what's going on. Hey, Shine, buddy. How you doing, man? How things going East Tennessee way? How was your weekend, man? You got everything done all right? Taken care of? Looking good, man? Everything good to go? That's what I'm talking about. Yeah? Yeah, we did. Yeah. Oh, geez. Yeah. Yeah, not your fault, right? Yeah. That's what I'm talking about, man. Hey, speaking of a great week of real news, let me see here. Let's just go ahead and dive into some of these local stories because I don't know, maybe just to fill time a little bit. I don't really want to focus on this story long. It's just, it's a lot of people are talking about this over the weekend. And I suppose it sets up some kind of libertarian sort of theme for the show today. I'm not even frankly sure, but what I'm talking about, Sean, if you want to go ahead and pull up, actually, let me just update people again what we're working on here in the Nashville area, and then we'll get to the next story as Sean pulls up the city to take legal action after large house party in East Nashville. That's the story everybody was talking about over the weekend as far as it pertains locally, at least one of the stories. Everybody knows, by the way, too, one thing we're working on here in the Nashville area. If you're in the Nashville area, several members of the Real News audience have already come out and helped with this cause. It's been fantastic. It's also been fantastic getting to know each one of y'all. Eric and I hung out a little while back. Our buddy Phil helps us out all the time. There's a lot of folks out here in the Middle Tennessee area that are also part of this program. Amy's out all the time. I met Jonathan to sign the petition one day. All kind of folks out here that listen to this program, that build this community with us, that throw comments in the comment section here. They've all come out and taken part of this effort that we're trying to do in the Middle Tennessee area. We keep pitching as this thing with the property tax related to the property tax, which it is, but it does far, far more than that. It increases government transparency. Anytime more than $250,000 is spent on a Title VII corporation with taxpayer money here in the Metro Middle Tennessee, Nashville area, the Tennessee Open Records Act applies, meaning that the Metro government, upon request, has to show where that money went, what it's being used for. It should seem like that should be already happening, but it's not, unfortunately. Under this new amendment, it would. Number 4, goodgovernment.com. Number 4, goodgovernment.com. That's where you find the petition. We need a little bit of help giving the last little home stretch number of signatures. Now, what this does is we need 10% We need 10% of the total vote during the primary. We didn't know that total until last Thursday night. We didn't know the total, and I didn't update much on this on Friday, so just bringing everyone up to speed. We didn't know the total of the vote during the primary period until last Thursday night. That total was around, say, about 118,000 people. It's a pretty large voting primary. It's a pretty large number of folks that voted during the primary here, about 118,000 folks. That's a good turnout, man, at least for the metro area. So, call it 12,000 is what we need. Good, solid 12,000 number of signatures. And you want to double that number just to be safe when you're walking in there. So call that 20 to 25,000, somewhere in that ballpark. That's what we need, and we're pretty darn close, but we have until September 14th to get the rest of those signatures. We're making one final home push to get the number of signatures to double it out there as we need to be comfortable to walking in. Now, when we walk in there with that, not only would this petition decrease the 34% property tax increase, moving that down to 2%, it would cap it at no more than 2% every single year without a voter referendum, right? You could go above vote 2% if you wanted to, as long as the people in metro areas said, yeah, I don't mind my property tax first. And some of them don't. Let me tell you, I ran into a few people over the weekend who just straight told me, yeah, I don't mind my property tax going up because somebody's got to pay for some of this stuff. Now, the obvious retort that's given to that is, well, you could also cut some stuff too, but you don't have to perpetually grow. I mean, you don't have to just continually always grow. There's ways you could stall it or put a pause in it for a minute, maybe pull some of that stuff back. And I've also been told by former council members, one of the people that came out to help us knock was a guy named Dwayne Dominy. He was a former Metro Council member about 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, something like that. And he would tell me even back then in the metro area, and I presume several departments are like this, in the metro area, there was about 200 police positions that were just not filled. They just had nobody working for them. So sometimes the retort will come back when things happen like this of saying, well, you either have to cut government spending or you have to raise taxes. That's usually how the equation is laid out in anything. And it's also pertinent to some of these issues we're talking about later on today with the executive order that was just passed, right? You either have to raise taxes or cut spending, yeah? But sometimes the cutting spending, some people would say, well, that means people are going to get fired. I had a lady walk up to me when we first started this. She was a Metro employee, and all she said was, I just want you to know that if this passes, I want you to know how many people are going to lose their job. And then she just walked away. It's like, well, I'll let you win that one. If you want to have a conversation about it, though, what ends up happening sometimes, at least as far as it pertains a few years back with the Metro government, the information I was told by a former Metro councilman himself said about 200 positions in that police department weren't even filled. No one was working for them. They were just budgeted for. Does that make sense? Money had been allotted to the police department for positions that they said, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we could fill these type things? But they were never actually filled. And then the inevitable question comes, as I asked this former Metro council member, I said, well, what happens to that money? He said, well, they use it for something eventually. It just kind of goes to a slush fund, which is a very derogatory term for that type of funding. It's been allocated for certain things. It's just what it ends up being used for is not exactly what it was originally allocated for. Does that make sense? The money ends up getting used at some point. It's just not what it said it was going to be used for. So I suppose I'm getting to a point here when I said, you could envision a way to cut a bunch of spending that would not actually lose employees. It would just lose some sense of money that's kind of, well, slush fund's the best word for it, man, but it's just money that's out there that's been allocated for a certain purpose that's not used for that certain purpose, but they would love to use it for a purpose. You know what I'm saying? Anyways, all that to say, number4goodgovernment.com, number4goodgovernment.com. Follow that website. If you know anybody that's a registered voter in Davidson County, get this in their hands. Let's make a difference. Let's make a change here. Let's put this on the ballot for December 5th. Once it's on the ballot for December 5th, we have increased stewardship, increased transparency. That 34% property tax rolls all the way back down to 2%. And it basically places the decision-making power in the people's hands here. Hey, Sean, as we're in some of the local stories here, let me ask Facebook, you guys got going anything going on out in Knoxville way? You want to bring up anything like that? If not, man, honestly, dude, let me just ask you, Sean. There's this story in East Nashville. It's like a 2-minute video snippet covering some house party that happened in East Nashville, and now all of a sudden the city's up in arms about it. Dude, frankly, I just don't care. I really don't care, and I think that's the only analysis I want to give on it.
We should, since you've talked about it, we should give the headline, give a synopsis of what happened since you talked about it.
There's this house in East Nashville, man. It's called the Art House or something.
Grant.
More on how the city plans to take action. Cooper says that the city is taking some legal action against a business that threw a massive party at an
the inevitable mechanism, essentially. Can anything be done about it, essentially? The idea, I suppose, is it pushes this idea. Okay, so you're having a massive house party with a couple hundred people there or something, and I don't know. What do? You send out police? Well, they did send out police. They sent out police, and the police didn't do anything about it because what are the police supposed to do? Arrest 200, 300 plus people for violating some city ordinance? I mean, possibly, sure. But what's your end goal here? What are you wanting to accomplish? What do you hope is going to come out of this? So the story ended up becoming that it frustrated people. Mayor Cooper then had to respond. Mayor Cooper's response was something to the effect of, like, we're going to crack down in the future, yada, yada. But I think really the only reason I wanted to bring this up is let's say that people just start flaunting rules, which is what they're going to do. Let's say people just start willfully ignoring any of these local ordinances. They start willfully ignoring mask laws. They start willfully ignoring, I don't know, showing up to church when they're not supposed to. That's exactly what's going to happen. And when that starts to happen, that question then will be posed, what are you going to do about it? Said government that put that law into place in the first place. What is your enforcement mechanism? Are you really going to send your police officers out there to arrest a couple hundred people at a house party? Are you going to find a bunch of them? Are you going to cite citations to all these people? That's not what happened over the weekend. They just frustrated some people around them. And I suppose in the libertarian sense, that's where I wanted to bring up this conversation of, okay, so let's say you have a couple hundred people that show up to a house party in East Nashville. Are they then risking their own lives is one thing. I don't care, right? I mean, you do what you want to with your own life, sure. But then when they go back out into the rest of society, call it, or their community or whatever else, I mean, is there a libertarian line that you all draw to say you went to a massive house party, now you're back out here, the police aren't enforcing it clearly because, come on, man, it's not just impractical, it's slightly absurd to try and enforce it on that high of a level. But when they go back out to the community, is there a line that libertarians draw, say, well, hold on, now that you've been, around a bunch of people spreading around, you're back in here. Well, nobody made that claim that it was going to be problematic when 5, 6, 7,000 people were marching out of the streets. And okay, way up in Mr. Henry, they were wearing masks. All right, man. So masks are the cure now? I mean, nobody's making that argument either. Nobody's making the argument that we can have college sports and football that 20,000 people can go sit in an arena somewhere as long as they're wearing masks. Nobody's making that argument. So nobody's consistent with it. And I think the lack of consistency is what's really hitting people. Let me read to y'all the final paragraph in this fee article. It's at the very bottom of the show notes here. It says, why the rule of law is vanishing in the age of COVID-19. And I think this is something that Real News has been preaching for a very long time, arguably since the beginning of all this stuff. The final paragraph in this fee article says this: when the law becomes incomprehensible and inconsistent, people lose faith in both the law and the government institutions that secure it. This may go a long way towards explaining the growing political animosity of the past decades. In ceasing to be a nation of laws, we've become instead a nation of lawmakers. If the law is to be king, it must speak in a clear and consistent voice. And if that can't happen, it should say as little as possible. Let me read the last two sentences there because I think those are the most important. Kelly says in Facebook, by the way, I'm here. Perhaps people are willing to take risks. Yeah, there you go. Jonathan just said the data on the virus has changed, but regardless, masks aren't going to stop this. And regardless, what I'm saying is there just needs to be a consistent application across the board for everybody involved because people are look, man, they lose faith in any institution that's promulgating these rules out there. That's saying to people, this is the rule, this is the law, you must follow and abide. Now, if you see some of the video that we just threw up there, the vast majority of these participants at this house party were outside. Now, granted, they were not wearing masks for sure, and they were not socially distancing. But the only real difference, I suppose, between that house party and those that are marching for something, aside for the reasons that they're there, the only real difference in, say, proximity, or at least to put it this way, in the ability or inability to transmit a virus, if that's even the proper word, transmit a virus, whatever. The inability or the ability for the virus to spread, shall I say. The only difference there is the mask wearing. So if everybody was wearing a mask at this house party, would that have made it any better? I don't know. But the last couple sentences in this fee article hit it here. In ceasing to be a nation of laws, we become instead a nation of lawmakers. If the law is to be king, it must speak in a clear and consistent voice. And if that can't happen, it should say as little as possible. Dude, those last two sentences really hit it. If you can't be clear and you can't be consistent in how any of these things apply, then you probably shouldn't say anything at all. And I'm talking about government here. I know it's a terribly difficult thing to say and take on, but if you can't be clear and consistent in who this applies to, then don't destroy the institution. Don't destroy the faith in the institution that those people have or had or might potentially have going forward. In this article too, just to get into a little bit more, we're gonna finish the show with some of this as well.
Can I just say one thing real to go with a comment we have here in Facebook? It says, try reading a congressional bill. Unless you're in the DC game, congressional bills are almost unreadable.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so that is the case. That is the case. And it's also very similar on most bills that go through the state house, to be honest. But it's way worse in DC. Way worse. So it's been this way a long time. It's just most legislation doesn't touch you. Or if it does, you don't realize that it's touching you. This stuff going on right now that's being passed by these metro governments, municipal governments, state governments, the reason it's bothering everybody and they're seeing all the inconsistencies is it's touching everybody. Unlike normal legislation does. So like this touches everybody. These rules touch everybody. Unlike when, say when Congress passes a tax bill, most people have no idea how it affected them. Or they have to hire someone and pay them for those people to tell them how they could take advantage of it or how to offset the disadvantages. I think this is just laying bare what we've been dealing with a long time and giving it to regular people because all these things apply to everybody. But I think it's dumb, and I think they're getting into a bear trap by going around and, I mean, maybe the public shaming of the party is as far as they can go. Because I think that you just can't go around stopping every little house party, just like they couldn't go around just stopping people from going to church.
Right.
It's just like there's not enough resources for that, and everyone knows that too. Everyone's like, well, if we all have house parties, what are they going to do? You know, that kind of thing.
Well, and it's not just the COVID stuff. I mean, this article does a great job of breaking down several things over like the last 10 to 15 years. They start with Real ID laws, for example, because in 2005, Congress passed this Real ID Act to establish, I don't know what they're calling, better standards for security authentication. But they kept pushing the ball forward. So in 2020, 15 years after this bill passed, it's still not being enforced. So it's one of two things, this article says. One of two things is true. Either Real ID compliant identification is important to our safety or it isn't. If it is, then we should have switched immediately. If it isn't, that the law is merely costing time and money and aggravation. So what's inconsistent is to claim that the law is necessary for our safety and then to delay the implementation for almost 2 decades. You hear what they're saying? 2005, we passed Real ID laws because it's necessary for our safety. But you wait 15 years to do anything about it and just keep kicking that can ball down the road. So people eventually think to themselves, so it wasn't actually necessary for our safety. Is that what I'm supposed to take away from this? That's just one example. They go on to say also, pro-tax politicians routinely claim that increases in income tax will not diminish workers' incentives to work. Yet many of those same politicians claim that taxes on cigarettes and sugary drinks are needed to dissuade people from consuming those things. So which is it? Either people alter their behavior in response to taxes or they don't. Okay, let's take another example here. Governor Cuomo recently issued emergency orders that New Yorkers must wear face masks in public, practice social distancing, and self-quarantine when they return to New York from various high-risk states. This is much more applicable to the story we brought up this morning. It's almost exactly what we're talking about. A governor says you have to do ABC. Wear a face mask, practice social distancing, wear a face mask, practice social distancing, and you have to quarantine when you return from high-risk areas. Well, the governor managed to violate all 3 of his own orders on a recent trip he took to Savannah. Now, a private citizen who behaves contrary to his own rules is merely a hypocrite. Hear this part. A private citizen that acts contrary to his own rules, they're just merely a hypocrite. But when an elected official does it, it sends a message to the people. It tells them that the official's orders are not actually that important. When the people that promulgate those rules are not themselves following it, then the people that have been told to follow the rules are thinking, well, you don't think it's important, so why should I? Here's another one. Officials in Nevada, in the name of protecting people from COVID-19, supported a 50-person cap on worship services. Okay, fine, but a 50% cap for casinos and restaurants. Hear those words importantly. A 50-person cap for worship services, but a 50% cap for casinos and restaurants. The effect is to allow a casino with a 1,000-person capacity to admit 500 people, but a church with a 1,000-person capacity could only admit 50 people. You get what I'm saying here, man? It doesn't matter how you feel about religion or Christianity or churches or worship. It doesn't even necessarily matter what you feel about the First Amendment, whether it should be more applicable to that than, say, a casino, because there are First Amendment protections for the former as opposed to the latter. What should be most important is the theme of what we're talking about here, the inconsistent application of all of this stuff, man, because people lose faith, not just in those that promulgate the laws, they lose faith in the institution themselves, and they just stop following. They just stop following. And as a weird way to transition into the first national story today of executive action overreach, whereas Trump taking needed action, that's the headline you'll see in the national story section. By the way, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or Twitch or wherever you're watching, linked in the show notes of the description section every single day of the show, there's a little link to an Evernote. And Evernote is literally what I'm looking at every single morning as we're going through the show. It's Sean and I, we're fairly meticulous with how we put this together. We don't waste a lot of time with it because we have actual jobs too. But we put a lot of work into doing this little show notes. So if you want to follow along, check out later on. We try and pull from a bunch of different sources. The first thing here, it's going to take about 4 or 5 minutes, Sean, if you want to play the entirety of it, or at least most of it. Trump over the weekend, talking about, again, keeping in the vein of what the executive branch should be doing, what the legislative branch should be doing, what we should or shouldn't be following, these faith in these institutions. I don't want to hide the ball on this too much. Right before we played this clip, let me just tell you where I'm coming from, okay? In a very strict libertarian sense, I don't like anything the president did over the weekend. I'm not gonna hide that ball from y'all. And this might be just my personal opinion, but I'll tell you what's happening right now. I'm not surprised by it, and I'm certainly having a fantastic time watching each party lose their ever-living mind over what just happened. Okay? Oh, my wife just brought me coffee. Thanks. Trump issues an executive order over the weekend. We're going to play about 4 minutes of it right now so he can fully lay out exactly what this executive order does. But what happened is Congress was dragging their feet. They weren't doing anything. There was a need, so some say. I don't think there was a need, but there was a need for a coronavirus economic relief. Now, I'll say this much. If you're going to put another relief bill out there to the tune of $1, $2, $3 trillion, if we're going to spend $6 to $7 to $8 trillion in a single year, dude, can you at least give it to the people instead of like some type of special interest or some sense of corporate welfare? I mean, can we at least make it slightly targeted and somewhat temporary with the way this relief is going through? Can you at least just try and help the people where they're at as opposed to shocking? I mean, come on, man. We spent $3 trillion, close to $4 trillion. Do you realize how big of a number trillion is? I mean, you looked at the graph. Have you seen that they actually charted out some type of artistic rendering as to how much a trillion, that number itself? It's almost incomprehensible how large that number is, especially when you're talking American dollars. If we're spending that much money, dude, it's certainly not going back to me. I'll tell you that much. It's going to somebody. I just know that, art institutes are getting $50 million and whatever. Here's the story over the weekend. Congress wouldn't do anything. Trump issues an executive order. And now Republicans are losing their mind a little bit because they're saying, well, maybe we shouldn't lose our mind because Trump is technically overstepping what we would like to see the executive branch do, but it's working out fine for us. And Democrats are stuck in this like beautifully inconsistent conundrum where Nancy Pelosi is claiming that the executive order is both unconstitutional and doesn't go far enough. And it's like, which one is it, Nancy? Is it unconstitutional or it doesn't go far enough? Okay. Because if you say it's unconstitutional, you almost have a weird moral imperative to do something about it. But Democrats won't do anything about it because if they challenge the constitutionality of it, then they have to defend on the back end while they are stalling money that's going back to the American people. The $400 used to be $600 or so.
Well, and
$600.
And if it's an emergency, if people need the money so bad, which is what they would argue, then it needs to happen right now, right? So waiting any amount of time they are in a real weird spot. And the other thing too are we in a national health crisis pandemic, or is it just a regular day at the beach?
Right.
You know, because under the emergency powers that they push for constantly and demand the president take action for safety all the time, demanding, well, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Well, you're like, well, you know, people, the reason they had to get it done, Grant, is those payments to unemployed people were going to stop.
Yes.
That's the reason they had to do it. That's $600 a month. They were going to stop. And the Democrats were using that as leverage, saying the mob's going to come after you because we're going to blame the Republicans. And then Trump goes, hey, aren't we under emergency powers right now? Can I just write law? Isn't that allowed?
That's what we're doing now, right?
He's like, can I just write law? I mean, everybody else is doing it. Gavin Newsom's doing it. Cuomo's doing it. Governor Lee's doing it. Everyone's doing it. Can I just write law? Right. And he can. That's what's so insane. What's so insane is Congress is finally the chickens are coming home to roost. He didn't take any power to do what he did over the weekend. He used power that Congress gave him. That's what he did. And it may get challenged, and whatever. We've seen a lot of things that are like hardcore statute secure that have lost in court. So he may, but I feel like under the fact that we're under emergency powers, health executive order or whatever, I feel like they would have a very tough time challenging it. Otherwise, I don't think Trump would have even done it in the first place. If it could be like, if they could go to a judge and get a, what do you call, like a hold on it or something like that. Stop the payments or something. I don't think they're going to be able to do that.
And again, I don't think they would want to risk the political capital to do that because, again, what you have to get under so many layers of, and this is the frustrating thing about where we are, not just in the political stance in America. We've been here for a while, but just with the coronavirus stuff and how volatile and how divisive politics is right now, no one has the time or the inclination to spend researching to get down to level 3 or 4. So if Nancy Pelosi comes out and tries to start spinning the narrative that we are challenging this, yes, you won't get your money, but we're challenging it because we're trying to do something better, because it's unconstitutional, because he's only going to give you $400 when it's actually $600, and that $400 isn't really $400, it's only $300 because 25% of it has to be picked up by the states. You understand how convoluted that is? No one's going to spend the time.
Why do they tell why do their constituents say, well, just pass $200 more? Just say I get $200. And then like that's new legislation. So I'll still be getting the $400.
No one's going to listen to Nancy Pelosi explain that. All they're going to hear is that Democrats they're stopping me from getting my paycheck. That's all they're going to hear. And that's all they're going to care about.
Hey, Jonathan in Facebook, the executive orders, this is according to Jonathan on Facebook. I don't know if it's true or not, but he says the executive orders were reviewed by the Office of Legal Services. They passed the legal review, unlike any of the Democrat or Republican constitutionality comments.
Well, and that is true. And that's what's frustrating Democrats so much right now. And think about this, too, in light of what we just saw the Supreme Court do. OK, so Barack Obama passes DACA with an executive order, and President Trump comes around the back end and wants to use that as a negotiation tool a few years down the road and says, hey, if it's placed in by an executive order, it could just reasonably be removed by executive order, which is usually how this should go. But the Supreme Court just a few weeks ago, what did this happen, a month and a week ago? It was very recently. The Supreme Court came back to President Trump and said, well, listen, while we agree with the fact that President Obama put something into power, enacted something through executive order, and you should be able, therefore, to remove it through executive order. We just don't like your reasoning. The reasoning behind removing an executive order really has to be very clearly articulated. Now, what they didn't realize they were doing at the time, or maybe they did realize they were doing this at the time, in saying that you have to have a clearly articulated reason, or at least in some cynical viewpoint, the Supreme Court saying, I have to agree, my bias has to agree with your bias as to why you're doing what you're doing, they actually lended far more power to executive orders than they ever had before. Do you see how that works out, right? Like by saying that President Trump couldn't arbitrarily remove an executive order, that's not the way to say it. By saying that President Trump couldn't remove an executive order through his bias or his political lens, they are saying that the executive order has a little bit more power than you think it might have had before. It's not just as arbitrary as one president does it and the other president gets rid of it. It can't be that. You know what I'm saying? Like it has to, there's now more power to that executive order than's been there before. So couple that with what Jonathan just said, where he said executive orders, they were reviewed by the Office of Legal Services. That is true. And they've passed legal review. One of the reasons why they passed legal review is because Trump is pulling this funding from the Department of Homeland Security. However many billions, if not trillions of dollars were allocated to that previously, I don't know. But he's pulling
National
this
Defense
funding.
Authorization Fund.
Yeah, right?
That's what it's the NDA. It's that authorization, which every year is almost $1 trillion or over $1 trillion. You know, it's like it's in the 900 billion range every year. I guarantee you that's where it's coming from.
So Trump, he's, pulling this money from stuff that's already been allocated, therefore jumping around Congress, having to, approve to spend that money or not spend that money. And again, I started this whole rant by saying, and yes, we probably do need to play what's actually in this thing so people can catch up if they don't know what's going on. But I started this whole rant by saying, like, I don't like it when Trump does it or when Obama does it. But I'm also not surprised either. That's what I find most disingenuous about what's happened over the weekend here, is both Democrats and Republicans' response. Again, keeping in context of the theme of the show today, a leader's hypocrisy is not just him not following his own rules. It's something entirely different. You know what I'm saying? When someone who promulgates those rules to me stops following them, I start to think, well, you don't care about that either, right? And with both Democrats and Republicans are now saying that they seemingly are surprised by this or have a problem with this. It's like, dude, come on, man. I know it's not true. It's just not true. If someone were to come out and say, like, look, we need to rein this back, but I can't blame them for doing this, right? Like if an Amash or a Massey or a Paul or somebody else come out and say, like, all this needs to stop. But can you blame the guy? Okay, he set up a pretty beautiful strategy here. Democrats aren't going to walk this back. And this negotiation back and forth that was going between Democrats and Republicans for months now, for literal months now, has all been put to bed because Trump just came in there and said, you know what, forget about it, man. I'm going to do exactly what Republicans wanted to do. Negotiations off the table. Y'all didn't want to play ball, so I'm pulling the deal off the table. It's exactly what happened. He said, I'm pulling the deal off the table and I'm just doing it unilaterally. And call me on it if you want to. Call my bluff, fine, but you're going to have to explain that later on, just like you had to explain the violence that's going on right now. Anyways, as I've been rambling, Sean, if you could, pull up that very first YouTube clip here. It's about 4 or 5 minutes, but it's Trump himself laying out exactly what this executive order would do. I think it's probably best that we just let him explain and we'll add a little bit more commentary and then switch topics here. But is that good to go?
We're going to save American jobs and provide relief to the American workers, and I'll be signing these bills in a very short period of time. First one is I'm providing a payroll tax holiday to Americans earning less than $100,000 per year. In a few moments, I will sign a directive instructing the Treasury Department to allow employers to defer payment of the employee portion of certain payroll taxes from September 1st. And we're actually going to be making that. We just got the word. We're just getting some word from a lot of people. We didn't think we'd have to do this because we thought the Democrats would be reasonable, but they've been not only unreasonable, they've been ridiculous. So we're going to make that August 1st, most likely. It'll be August 1st. We'll let you know the exact date, but we're looking like August 1st. So it'll be August 1st through the end of 2020. This will mean bigger paychecks for working families as we race to produce a vaccine. If I'm victorious on November 3rd, I plan to forgive these taxes and make permanent cuts to the payroll tax. I'm going to make them all permanent. Now, Joe Biden and the Democrats may not want that. They don't want that because they're adding $3 trillion in taxes. So they'll have the option of raising everybody's taxes and taking this away. But if I win, I may extend and terminate. In other words, I'll extend it beyond the end of the year and terminate the tax. Second, I'm signing an executive order directing the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HHS, and CDC to make sure renters and homeowners can stay in their homes. So I'm protecting people from eviction. The Department of Housing and Urban Development will also provide financial assistance to struggling renters and homeowners and work with landlords and lenders to keep Americans safely in their homes. So we don't want people being evicted. The third action I'm taking today will also provide additional support for Americans who are unemployed due to the China virus. Under the CARES Act, I proudly signed expanded unemployment benefits into law. Congressional Democrats have stonewalled our efforts to extend this relief. They even opposed measures that would give bonuses to workers returning to the job. They were totally opposed to that. For this reason, I'm taking action to provide an additional or an extra $400 per week in expanded benefits. $400, okay? So that's generous, but we want to take care of our people. Again, it wasn't their fault, it was China's fault. States will be asked to cover 25% of the cost using existing funding, such as the tens of billions of dollars available to them through the Coronavirus Relief Fund. Under this plan, states will be able to offer greater benefits if they so choose, and the federal government will cover 75% of the cost. So we're all set up. It's $400 per week. Fourth, I'm signing a directive providing relief to student loan borrowers. Earlier this year, we slashed student loan interest rates to zero. I don't know if people know that because the press doesn't ever report it, but maybe they're watching now. The press doesn't report a lot of good things that are good for the people and good for the country. Earlier this year, we slashed student loans, interest rates to 0% and suspended student loan payments, and Congress extended that policy through September 30th. Today, I'm extending this policy through the end of the year, and we'll extend it further than that, most likely right after December 1st. So we look like we're going to be extending that. They're paying zero interest. And again, not their fault that their colleges are closed down, and not their fault that they're unable to get what they bargained for. Through these four actions, my administration will provide immediate and vital relief to Americans struggling in this difficult time.
You heard it there, right? Hey, by the way, too, I wanted to give a quick shout out here. I just saw a comment from someone named Kyle on Facebook. I was like, oh, Kyle might be a new person. Then I read, and apparently it's Jessica. They're camping right now. She's listening on her man's phone. She says, so happy she got service. That's one of the coolest things I've heard in a while, man. Real News family out there just like trying to find ways to check out the program. She's out there doing the camping thing, so she's listening on her man's phone. Jessica, you're so awesome. I appreciate it. Love this Real News family. Saw that comment and I put it in Facebook here. That's why one of the reasons why I love the Real News family. So look, you heard Trump lay this stuff out. You've heard a little bit of our commentary. Here's what was coming from Pelosi and Ben Sass and a few others. It's a CNN headline here. Pelosi calls Trump's coronavirus executive actions absurdly unconstitutional. We've already said, well, is it though, Nancy Pelosi? Because if it is, you should probably do something about that. You can't call something absurdly unconstitutional and then say, like, well, we don't really care that it's absurdly unconstitutional. If it's absurdly unconstitutional, you probably should stop it. And if you stop it, you're going to have to own it. Here's what she said, quote, well, the fact is that whether they're legal or not takes time to figure out. That is very true. One of the strategies. She says, I associate my remarks with Senator Ben Sass, who says they're unconstitutional slop. Right now, we want to address the needs of the American people. State of the Union asked this from Ms. Pelosi over the weekend, saying, she said, as my constitutional advisors tell me, they're absurdly unconstitutional. She said, we're disappointed that instead of putting in the work to solve America's problems, the president instead chose to stay at his luxury golf course to announce unworkable, weak, and narrow policy announcements to slash unemployment benefits that millions desperately need and endanger Social Security and Medicare. The endanger Social Security and Medicare thing is you have to do some real work to get to that part of it. I mean, some serious work to get to the part of what she's talking about with endangering Social Security and Medicare. Suffice to say, it's not entirely untrue, but nobody in the American populace is going to follow you that far, Ms. Pelosi. And I think she realizes that. Now, Mitch McConnell, conversely, felt totally fine about this, saying, quote, struggling Americans need action right now. saying, since Democrats have sabotaged backroom talks with absurd demands that would not help the working people, I support President Trump's exploring his options to get unemployment benefits and other relief to the people who need them the most. And I say one more time, not only do I not like the idea of the executive branch doing this, what I think is actually going on, I believe personally, as most things are right now, a few months away from November, this is an election ploy. This is a political game. This is spending political capital. This is cashing in for votes. And I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. I'm just saying I think the motivation is slightly, if not almost entirely, unrelated to the actual relief bill itself. I think it's almost unrelated to actually helping out Americans. I think it's a little bit more to do with the idea of Trump is now looking to be in this savior role because Democrats just wanted to stall for the sake of politics. Dude, all of it is politics. And I'm allowed to be this cynical about all this because of how we started the show this morning. Because of how there's so many rules for thee and not for me, this thing, type thing. And again, it's not even necessarily a critique per se. It's just something I'm recognizing. Ben Sass said this, by the way. At least one Republican probably criticized Trump. He said that the pen and phone theory of executive lawmaking is unconstitutional slop. It's not necessarily untrue. That's not necessarily untrue. Ben Sass went on to say President Obama did not have the power to unilaterally rewrite immigration law with DACA, and President Trump does not have the power to unilaterally rewrite the payroll tax. Under the Constitution, that power belongs to the American people acting through their members of Congress. Correct. So do something about it. Do something about it then, man. I mean, do you hear what I'm saying? What are you doing then, Ben? What are your folks doing up there? You're not doing a lot, are you? I mean, if the purpose is just to stall, that's fine. Again, I've said from the beginning, I don't like the idea of spending $6 trillion. Nobody should. No fiscally conservative Republicans should like the idea of spending this much money in a single year, especially when you can track that money and show that so much of it is going to things that are just asinine. It's certainly not going back to the American people. We'll say that much, man. If there was bills out there were targeted and temporary in their version of relief in a time that is unprecedented, then yes, we could possibly have a conversation about that. But out of the $4 trillion that is spent right now, how much of that money can we say has been targeted and temporary? Not a lot of it. And I think this all culminates for me right now where CNN claims at the very bottom there, as you see in the show notes in all purple highlighted, Democrats are likely to challenge the executive actions of court. I don't know, CNN. I wouldn't jump that far with it yet. I mean, that's a high mark to meet, man. I say that because this next YouTube clip, Steve Mnuchin just kind of laid this thing out here. He lays out exactly what's going on. Congress wouldn't take action, so Trump did. Now Trump is daring Democrats to come challenge his order, giving money to the American people right before an election. Sean, if you can pull that clip up, it should be automatically linked to start right around minute 250 there. This is Steve Mnuchin over the weekend. He was asked about some of this stuff, and he just straight responds by telling him, hey, come challenge it, man. But you got to own this. Go ahead and start that at 250, Sean, and we'll let it play through a little bit because the commentary is pretty good afterwards.
Meanwhile, you had Treasury Secretary Mnuchin on television over the weekend as well. He explained exactly what the president hopes happens here with this payroll tax deferral. Here's what he said.
We've been told by the states they can get this up and running immediately. And I would say if the Democrats want to challenge us in court and hold up unemployment benefits to those hardworking Americans that are out of a job because of COVID, they're going to have a lot of explaining to do.
So, Becky, essentially a dare there from the Treasury Secretary saying, look, go ahead, sue us. If you want to be the political party that's suing to stop unemployment checks going to unemployed people ahead of an election, go ahead and do that. And that's sort of where we are. It's a real standoff here in Washington. Not clear when negotiations can resume. We're told that there wasn't really any meaningful contact between Democratic leaders and the White House over the weekend, and we'll see what Monday brings.
Hey, Eamon, let's start.
Sorry. I actually interrupted too soon there, Sean. Go ahead and keep playing that because the next question she asked is pretty important too. Sorry, go ahead.
There'll be a bunch of questions that I know all three of us want to ask coming out of this, but let's start just with the very basics. If the Democrats challenge any portion of this, does that mean they challenge all of it? Because I could see them saying, okay, we want to challenge the idea of a payroll tax holiday or a relief at this point, but we don't want to stop the checks from going out.
Right. I mean, there are 3 different executive memoranda here and an executive order. So you could do a lawsuit that targets specific federal action that's contemplated by the president here. So you don't have to challenge the whole thing if you're the Democrats. You can go after bits and pieces. The question is, politically, what's the strategy? You saw Nancy Pelosi over the weekend arguing that this was both unconstitutional and also too little. If it's unconstitutional, then the Democrats really are putting themselves in a position where they sort of morally or righteously would need to sue to block it. But also, if it does provide any little bit of help, they don't want to be in a position of being the ones to take that away.
Okay,
you keep saying it's $400 in unemployment. It's really.
He's exactly right. And in total honesty, being completely candid, that's a little bit of where I got that commentary from this morning. Was this guy saying it? I was prepping.
You know what Trump has done? He's pulled the rug out. He's taken their strategy.
Yeah.
And they being the Democratic Party, and made it his strategy. He was like, "Oh, that was working. You know, we try to do something responsible, and you call us monsters." You know, and you just give away the farm and say you're a benevolent God, you know. I can do that. I can give away the farm. And the reason they hate him in D.C. so much, Republicans and Democrats, is because he will do things that are out of character for a Republican president and lean in. He won't do it apologetically or tiptoe up to it and stick his toe in the water. He just dives right in. Like, I'm going to add unemployment and payroll tax holiday, and everyone gets a teddy bear and a kitchen sink, and everybody gets a vacation to Florida, you know, something like that. And that's why in D.C., I want to say he's a dangerous man. But I know that can be interpreted in all these weird kind of ways. I mean, politically and figuratively and metaphorically, he's dangerous to people who live in Washington, D.C. because he doesn't fit in any mold. How mad is the Democratic leadership right now?
Dude, right?
Because this is the game they've been playing since May, where they basically held the upper chamber and the executive branch hostage based on some kind of moral hierarchy type thing. Where, like, we're the top of the moral hierarchy. We decide what is like the safe the safe stuff and the benevolent stuff. We're the only arbiters of what is safe. We're the only arbiters of what is benevolent. And that's been taken away. It's been taken away. And that's why they're so mad. And for Republicans too, it's like, I think the reason McConnell's not upset is he's like, this is just, where have y'all been? This has been Trump for the past 3 years.
Right. Look, in some sense, man, I count myself thinking here, I guess, and I'm really gonna have to do some research to make sure that this statement actually holds up. But I suppose in some small sense, it's arguably better in a fiscal sense to use money that has already been allocated as opposed to just printing more of it out of thin air. I mean, I would rather dilute the entirety of our currency less doing it this way than alternatively doing it through Congress. I mean, like, I'll ask it this way. Okay, so where does everyone think, for anybody that's just now tuning in and burning into politics or something else, in the $3.7 trillion that we've spent this year, where's that money coming from? And if we're not raising taxes, then the money has to be coming from somewhere. And I think most people could reasonably work their way or logically work their way into thinking, well, they're just printing more of it, aren't they? I mean, I would assume that's what's happening. I think that's what everyone else is assuming, that's what's happening. And I think you're just flooding the market with more capital, I think is what's going on. And as you flood the market with more capital, you get closer and closer to a situation of inflation. Now, I don't know when that bleeds over into a hyperinflation scenario. I don't pretend to understand the economics like the people that are actually making these decisions. Hopefully, somebody smarter than me up there is making these decisions. Hopefully. And again, that's a big hope. But in the minimal amount that I do understand about economics, if it is true that he's pulling this money from DHS, and it's already been allocated, you don't have to print more of it, I suppose that's a better alternative than printing another $1 trillion just out of thin air, further diluting the value of what my dollar is. I mean, if I have $1 in my wallet right now, last year, it's probably worth a little bit more than it might be next year. And again, I'm kind of, it's not rhetorical. I'm kind of asking if that's true, because this could put a slightly better spin on some of it. I still, again, what we basically had over the weekend is the executive branch enacting a decision that is almost exclusively left to Congress. and Congress taking that power and allocating it to a different branch either several years ago or piecemealing it out. I don't care how we got here, man, but that's basically where we're at. So I don't like the feeling of it, but I'm just saying it is what it is. We are where we are right now. I'm not surprised by it happening. What I am a little bit surprised, though, is the Democrats, I think, are finally picking up on some of these cues right now. Now, we don't have time to get into these stories today. We're going to be picking
can I ask one more question, too? Like, why is it okay to give people money who make less than $100,000 a year? But Democrats don't like when you don't have to pay taxes when you make less than $100,000 a year. Wow. Why would they not be for? It's not like he said payroll tax holiday for rich people. It's people who make less than $100,000 a year, which includes people who make minimum wage. It's all the regular people. Like, why is it okay to give them cash, but it's not okay to not tax them? What is with that?
Honestly, that's what I'm saying.
That is insane. It's like when the Republicans first had their tax bill 3 years ago, Grant, and they were talking about like people who make less than $30,000 a year or couples who make less than $50,000, no taxes. And the Democrats were the ones who got rid of that provision.
Right.
And what is with that? I mean, like, it's okay to give them money, but it's not okay to not tax them. That's weird.
Right?
It's very odd.
Hey, Kelly said on Facebook, by the way, Pelosi's a worm. Jonathan said the Democrat demands are asinine. Jessica, through Kyle's account, which is so awesome. Jessica said, OMG, it's like a try me remark. She's talking about Steve Mnuchin saying, try me, man. Bring it. Throw that gauntlet down. Call me on my bluff. Let's see what happens there. Jonathan said, and that the character trait is for America what they love about him. Jessica said, salty as F word, LOL. Let's see. Jonathan said, it's far better to have the money, use the money that we have than inflate the living crap out of the dollar. I would hope to absolutely agree with that. It says that inflation always devalues what you don't incur interest on. And I'm starting to think, so one of the themes for the show today is, rules for thee, not for me. Once the American populace, or anybody for that matter, starts to pick up on this idea that those promulgating the rules are not actually following them themselves, they stop believing in those rules. They just don't think that they're lawful. Not only do they not think they're lawful, they think the people that told them that they should be lawful, they don't care about them, so I shouldn't care about them either. All right, now we fast forward a little bit in here. That means Democrats and Republicans are going to kind of start to play the same game with each other. And as they start to play the same game with each other, you're going to get very odd feeling results like this. And at some point, somebody's going to have to start pulling some of this back. And some of these things that they're going to have to start pulling back for a while has been stories that we don't have time to get to today. I just want to tease it for what we're going to start doing tomorrow. We'll probably start the program with some of this, where it says in the show notes, is reality coming back? Liberal outlets report things harmful to their narrative, specifically speaking about the violence Antifa or otherwise. I don't care what organization is doing. I don't care which individuals are doing it. I don't. It's just there's violence been happening in the streets of Seattle, of Portland. How many people have died? How many people have died? Bunches.
40 or 50.
Right? 40 or 50 folks. So we're seeing 2 or 3 headlines here. One from CNN, oddly enough, one from CNN that's actually finally reporting on the fact that it's Portland police that declare a riot after people tried to start a fire at a police office. This is style of reporting you just wouldn't have heard. You would not have heard CNN report on this stuff. This is one of the first times ever that CNN or anybody else has started to report on the idea that Antifa or some other organization is doing something destructive out in the streets of Portland. Normally, the tack to take has just been don't talk about it. But now, not only is CNN starting to report on it, they're saying that it's the Portland police that are declaring it, which if you don't realize why that's such an important distinction, because the narrative CNN and everybody else had just finished pitching, I'm talking just last week, finished pitching to us, is that in Portland in particular, if federal troops would leave, the violence would stop. This is Portland police that allegedly restarted that violence. So that narrative is destroyed now. It is Portland local police that are having to fight and stop this stuff now. And CNN even reports in this story that up until about 10:30, these things were peaceful. And then shortly after, somebody somewhere took a hard turn specifically directed to this police precinct. Like, they went out of their way to go find this police office and start a fire in there. I mean, I've never heard CNN report stuff like this
Which is
before.
an Antifa tactic. That is
It
what
is.
they do. They hijack protests. They know everyone is a sheep lemmings that are at these people at these protests. But in large crowds, people follow leaders. And Antifa people will send like 5 people up to the front of the crowd. They'll start waving flags and they'll just turn the crowd.
Right.
It happened all the way back in Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah. So you have CNN reporting on something for real? I don't know. I was surprised by it. I saw that headline. Then I saw an interview with the mayor of Portland. And again, we don't have time to get into this because we literally have 2 minutes left in the show. I just want to tease this for tomorrow and book in what we've been saying today. The mayor of Portland comes out and says, like, if you're starting a fire, that's attempted murder. The mayor of Portland, this is the guy who willingly got tear gassed with Antifa members out in front of that federal court building just a week ago. Coughing through the tear gas in this, this scene on the screen where he could empathize directly with the crowd. But I guess
let's give him even more. Let's give him even more. This is the guy who stood with protesters while they tried to burn down a federal courthouse for 70 plus days.
Yeah.
It's murder when they try to burn down something owned by the Portland people.
Right.
It's murder now. But this is a guy who stood with the protesters trying to burn down a federal building. It wasn't murder then. It was protesting. It was peaceful protesting then. But now that we're at a Portland police precinct, it's murder.
So you have CNN reporting on it. Now you have the mayor of Portland walking his statements back. Not even just walking it back. I mean, he's going a full 180 the other direction of exactly what Sean just said. Well, I mean, as long as it's one of our folks, and if it's our things, it's straight up attempted murder. And finally, culminating with this New York Times headline, everyone should read this and then read the Twitter responses too. Read the entire article for this New York Times. Somebody from the New York Times went down and interviewed every single business owner or most of the business owners in that shop section and then released what she found. And dude, I'm telling you, this lady was excoriated over the weekend. I mean, excommunicated, almost like shutting down Twitter accounts type stuff. Some of these responses were so bad because the article that she pinned essentially said exactly what you would think. Business owner said, I was held hostage, mafia tactics, nobody could come in. Stuff broken out, tens of millions of dollars worth of damages. This was not peaceful stuff. I did not appreciate these people. There's no sense of liberation here. This is absurd. So article after article after article, as we have to end the program here today, I just want to book in on the idea of like, yes, stuff is crazy. Yes, there's rules for thee and not for me. Yes, people are getting frustrated with it. But as that frustration comes, as we feel the same things, reality will return because objective truth always inevitably rises to the top. It must. It always will. That is what truth does. Whoever is pushing it or whoever doesn't want to see it or for whatever particular reason, CNN, New York Times, Mayor of Portland, all having to walk stuff back now. Now, they will have to answer the mob eventually, and it's going to be rough to see when that comes. But I'm telling you right now, the inability to own this continued violence, in my mind, is yet just a sort of glimmer of hope, if you will, out there on the horizon somewhere that just given enough time, keep preaching truth in love, compassion, and sincerity as we pitch to do here at Real News. And this objective truth will come back, I promise y'all. Hey, it's 10. Shannon, I got to get off. We got work things to do. Love each and every one of y'all. Sincerely, seriously. If you want to help us out with the property tax thing, get in touch with me directly. We're going to do some door knocking, a whole bunch of other stuff this week. Love y'all for real. We'll see y'all next time.